So I didn't turn off the filter on my fish tank today, so you're gonna hear like rippling water in the background. I kind of like it. Hope it's not distracting to you. I'm John Kirkwood, and welcome to Church Without Walls. I'm Peytonless. I'm without Peyton today. She's got stuff going on Sunday mornings right now. So maybe she'll revisit us in the near future, but people have asked. She's fine. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Excavating Jesus. That might be a provocative title, and the picture you're seeing there is from True Detective Season 1. That actually is Matthew McConaughey playing a role, probably one of the most fascinating, psychological approaches to nihilism in modern TV. He's playing Rust Cole. He's sitting in a bare apartment with a crucifix hanging up behind him. I use that as our point of departure for this discussion, which came to me a few years back when a friend talking with me about another friend who had deconverted, who had left Christianity and the church, and for the time being his faith, for a number of different reasons. But we were both talking about this friend because he's thoughtful and smart and made some great points in expressing his new path. And my friend said something I'll never forget, something that I've seen come true 1,000 times over since Wendy and I have started the Sparrow's Call and talked and walked with people who are walking away from their faith. They're walking away from at least the church or their corner of what they would consider their faith. And he said this. He said, John, sometimes to view he said this: sometimes to find the true Jesus, you must walk away from Christianity. Sometimes to find the true Christ, you must walk away from Christianity. And that was such a profound statement. It reminded me of the statement that an English Christian, whose name escapes me right now, philosopher, used to say years back, to view true Christianity, one must nearly ignore all Christians. Both of these statements have this idea that the church has not done its best to reflect Christ to the rest of the world, that there has been something that Christendom itself has done to obscure the beauty that is Jesus, or the story of the Christ. And so that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about this morning. And I want to be careful to keep this short. Excavating Jesus means attempting to take the etch-a-sketch that is our past and our upbringing, and anything that might have, clouded who Jesus is through doctrines or dogmas or creeds, and to take that etch-a-sketch and shake it clean and start fresh with a contemplation of Jesus devoid of the entanglements of statements of faith or creeds or denominations or church councils or anything like that. Let's start at square one. I'm going to suggest this to you, knowing fair well that there are both believers and unbelievers that listen to this show. There are those people of faith and Christians, and also atheists who are along for the ride, and of course we welcome you all. And I bring this up because I think there are two groups who sometimes have a hard time with shaking the Etch-a-Sketch. I think there are two groups that have a hard time objectively looking at Jesus, and that is the very devout and the extreme atheists. Now, I know a lot of atheists who are thoughtful and objective, and I think there is a caricature of the atheist that we draw, just as there is a caricature of the person of faith. That's always the Westboro Baptists or some ignorant, snake-handling, Pentecostal from the Deep South, which is just as wrong as the idea of the spitting, angry atheists who won't consider any objective argument. So I understand that those are very small groups. Sometimes they are the most vocal in the room. So I want to consider that a little bit as we excavate Jesus. And from under the rubble that the church has made of expressing who Jesus is and was. I want to start this by circling back to Russ Cole. True Detective Season 1 was maybe the best written television ever. Now, I would throw in the mix Breaking Bad. Personally, I think that was almost Shakespearean. Some people would say The West Wing was written very well, Aaron Sorkin, or The Newsroom. There's other nominees, you might say, but True Detective, even though it's dark because it's two detectives, Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, searching to bring down a serial killer. That's the background. The real movie is about these two, or I should say the real series, is really about these two detectives who don't really like each other all that much, who find themselves respecting each other a hell of a lot by the end of the series. But anyway, Woody Harrelson plays Marty, who is a nominal Christian who never thinks about Christ. And he's shocked to find that his new partner, this atheist, this materialist, this nihilist, has almost nothing in his apartment. When he goes to meet Rust, there's barely a stick of furniture in the apartment. There's nothing hanging on the wall. There's no flowers. There's no color. It's very gray. It's very stark. It is an empty canvas with the exception of a crucifix. A cross with Christ hanging on it on the wall. And he sees this, and then they get into the car. This is in season 1. And Marty says to Rust, he says, "So you're a Christian?" And Russ says with gusto, "No." And so Marty asks him, "So then why do you have this crucifix hanging on your wall? Why is this obviously so prominent, right? It's the only thing you have hanging up on your wall is this crucifix. Like typically you see this in Catholic households or people of religious faith." So this is where we're going to jump in right now. And this is from True Detective. Here we go.
What do you got the cross for in your apartment?
It's a form of meditation.
How's that?
I contemplate the moment in the garden. The idea of allowing your own crucifixion.
But you're not a Christian, so what do you believe?
I believe that people shouldn't talk about this type of shit at work.
Hold on. 3 months we've been together, I get nothing from you. Today, what we're into now, do me a courtesy, okay? I'm not trying to convert you.
Look, I'd consider myself a realist, all right? But in philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist.
Okay, what's that mean?
Means I'm bad at parties.
Let me tell you, you ain't great outside of parties either.
Now that scene carries on. with some salty language. And actually, it's a deep and worthy conversation, but I've given you just a taste of it because that's really all we need for this conversation. Here, Rust and Marty, one of them's a Christian, one of them's not. But the one who's not, the nihilist, the materialist, the pessimist, the one who's really got some dark things he's wrestling with, he often contemplates the cross. Whereas the nominal Christian, who's actually not bashful about saying that he's a Christian, doesn't really give it much thought. And before you say, well, this is Hollywood painting Christians in a bad way, I mean, he could have been sitting next to somebody who's more devout. I think it touches on something that I've actually seen in my many years in a pastor's family, whether I was a pastor's child or a pastor myself, talking to thousands and thousands of people of faith. I have found that the Marty character is rather normal. And I'm not just picking on Christians. I meet a lot of people, and I know you probably have too, whether you're maybe a Muslim or Jewish, especially Jewish, but believe it or not beating up on Jewish people today, but there are a lot of Jewish people in America who are, well, they might bar mitzvah and they might celebrate certain holidays, but they don't contemplate their faith at all. And so I think most people of faith are in this nominal category. I don't know what percentage it is. I don't know if there's ever been a study on it. I don't know if it's maybe upwards of 80%, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out that it is, that there's really a small percentage of people in a faith that actually contemplate its depth. There are a lot of people who just accept it, born into it, they hear it, they believe it. I'm not saying they don't believe it, but it isn't at the front of their mindset. They're building a business or a family, or they're chasing down needs and desires, and just not prominent in their thought system. So a few years back, when I still held a pulpit in the Chicago area, I noticed that a lot of people, even in our church, which was considered more of a highbrow, more of a thinking church, more of a Bible-based church, even in our church, there was this readiness or willingness to rent out your mind to other men's thoughts. If asked what they believe, they would be quoting someone other than their own spade work. Even though they'd consider themselves Bereans, they had allowed other men to think for them, or women, and or whatever the statement of faith says. Yeah, I have no argument with that. I'll sign it. Seems right to me. There were exceptions, but so to incite an excitement about the person of Jesus again, I asked the church that didn't spend much time in the Gospels to take their summer reading and reread the Gospels and reconnect with Jesus. And I asked them to do something very difficult. I said, would you mind, as you're reading, Matthew through John, or if you want to do extra credit, even add Acts to the Acts of the Apostles to it, would you mind considering these texts, these scriptures, with a fresh mind? In other words, as you're reading it, I don't really care for you to inject what you believe about water baptism, or that miracles don't happen today, or anything like that. Just read the texts as if you were reading them for the first time. There's this beautiful, beautiful scene. Maybe the greatest expression of the gospel that I've ever seen in movie form, outside of maybe John Caviezel taking the soap in I Am David. Maybe the greatest gospel scene I've seen in all of movie making has come out of a nominal Jewish director's work. That would be Steven Spielberg in the movie Amistad, where these slaves who are being held before John Quincy Adams represents them in the Supreme Court, are given a Bible, and they're looking through this Bible that they can't read, right? It's in English. And yet, it's one of those Bibles that has pictures in it. And in the gospel section, one of the slaves is looking at the series of pictures surrounding the life of Jesus, and he sees Jesus healing the sick and talking in front of people and walking on water, and he sees this series, and he notes that it's the same person in these pictures, this Jesus figure. And then he notices a stark change, that all of a sudden Jesus is arrested and beaten and crucified. And he's explaining it to this disinterested slave next to him by showing him the pictures. And I thought this was just such a wonderful expression of the gospel coming from an anominally Jewish director. What reverence he had for the story, even if he doesn't believe it. And remarkable reverence he also showed in by the way, Raiders of the Lost Ark, not Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Last Crusade, the one with James Bond playing the father of Indiana Jones with the Cup of Christ and all. But I'll leave you to that. I brag about Spielberg on another date. But have that childlike view again as you read through the Gospels and look at Jesus, and maybe make some notes that are unfiltered by your denominational creeds, by the biases that have been given to you from Sunday school and Awana and whatever, catechism, whatever. Check those at the door and just read it fresh for the first time and tell me what you think of this Jesus guy. Sometimes when I'd come into contact with someone who I thought maybe a little bit arrogant in their approach, and it's dangerous to say something like that. I am making a judgment by that. But sometimes when I'd meet somebody who came up to me seemingly like challenging and expressing anything but Christ-like attitude toward something that I revere, that I don't consider just trivial pursuit. Somebody who I thought was handling the conversation carelessly, I would kind of break from their point of inquiry, and I'd say, it's wonderful that we're both brothers in Christ. What do you find is most attractive about Jesus? What is your favorite teaching of Jesus? What is your favorite moment in the life of Christ? And you'd be surprised at the difficulty in which that question was handled. Now, if I meet a Bears fan and I say, what's your favorite Bears moment? What's your favorite Bears player? Tell me about your fanaticism. Tell me about the history of you and the Chicago Bears. And it might be, my father used to take me to the games when I was little, and I met, Doug Plank when I signed up for Pee Wee football, that kind of thing. You can't stop the guy from talking. It might take you 3 hours, and he'll tell you all of this. I was on a walk with my daughter the other day. Mom and I watched the '85 Bears yesterday, like a discourse and a documentary on the '85 Bears, the best team in NFL history. Really, it's indisputable. But we were watching this, and it got to a section about Walter Payton and sweetness. We both started tearing up because not only did we both love Walter, but we named our daughter Payton after Walter. And I was on a walk with my daughter the other day, and she knows that my two favorite players are Dick Butkus and Walter Payton. And we'd never talked about this. She knows she's named after Walter. We even call her Sweetness. And she loves that. She likes Walter. And as we're walking, though, she said to me, she goes, Dad, I'm really glad you didn't name me Butkus. And then I told her Rocky has a dog named Butkus. But boy, how did we get there? I haven't done this in a while. How did I get trapped there? Oh, the Bears. If you ask a fan of the Bears or the Cubs or, Notre Dame football, you can't get them to shut up. But ask a Christian about Jesus. Most of the answers I got was he died for my sins. It's a Sunday school answer. And to them, it's like the highest thing you could say, right? Because without the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, then we're just dust. We're just mortal. We don't have a future. And so I get that there's an anthropomorphic gravity toward that answer. And I usually say, okay, aside from that, what about, a moment in his life? A teaching maybe, or I don't know, a miracle or something. It gets really difficult. They really have to, strain. It's not something that jumps off there. I mean, you ask me who my favorite Bears are, it's Peyton and Butkus, and I can tell you why. If you ask me why I don't like the Chicago Bears anymore, it's Peyton and Butkus, and I can tell you why. Dick Butkus had to sue the Bear administration to fulfill his contract when he injured his knee, and I couldn't like any organization that, as George Halas was once noted, would throw nickels around like they were, manhole covers. I think you should take care of your players, and Walter Payton was underpaid and underappreciated, and so I made a transition early on to Tom Landry and Roger Staubach, and I became a Cowboys fan, and now it's complicated. And this year I'm a Jets fan. But because I don't have a loyalty to geography. I have a loyalty to what I consider is noble and worthy of celebration. I'm one of those. So it changes from year to year. But having said that, if I ask somebody who's a Marxist, what about Marxism is appealing to you? They don't even have a problem telling me. They can quote Das Kapital, or they'll quote something. And if I ask somebody who's a Stoic, who follows Stoic philosophy, who's your favorite Stoic philosopher? And they'll jump at me and they'll say, Epictetus, and here's why I like him more than Marcus Aurelius, or I have a hard time deciding, or I'm a Stoic, but I love Diogenes, who was a cynic, and here's why. Talk your ears off. And it seems like Christians really struggle to talk about Jesus. Now, I know there's atheists listening, and maybe some of you are rolling your eyes, and I know at this time of the year that very small sliver of atheism trots out its arguments against Jesus and all religion and all faith and Christianity and so forth. And I was listening to one of these on YouTube the other day where they were talking about how the Jesus myth is not unique. There have been other miraculous births. There's been other times where gods have visited mankind. There have been other resurrection stories. Nothing about Jesus is unique, and they're downplaying Jesus. And they brought up in this video even this fact, truth. It's inarguable, that there were others who claimed to be the Messiah, even in the time of Christ. A number of other Jewish rabbis and Jewish celebrities and figures claim to be messiahs. So why should we pay any special attention to Jesus? And to me, that's the best question you can ask. I'm sorry, but I would have a hard time, even though I agree with atheists about a lot of things, I would have a hard time dismissing Jesus after you've just made all those arguments. That there are multiple figures that fulfill all these other things, just like Jesus. But why do we still talk about a carpenter's kid? How did this carpenter's kid change the calendar? This day, on a Sunday, there are billions of people going into buildings named after a carpenter's kid. How is it that thousands of years later, not only do we know his name, but we know his mother's name. I mean, if I was that hardcore atheist, I'd at least be curious about this one guy who, maybe there were, dozens of other people who matched this story, but how did this one stick? How has it been so impactful? That would drive me to curiosity a little bit. I'd be in the curious line a lot more than I'd be in the indifferent or reject this line. Now, I know there's a lot of nonsense that happens in Jesus' name. That's easy to look at and, roll your eyes or frown, but I'm not sure that we could put all of it on Jesus, when even the Bible, which isn't a perfect book, by the way, but even the Bible in both Testaments has God, right, rebuking his followers, his own followers, not atheists. God rebuking his own people, his own followers, people who've taken his name, and saying the worst thing that you could do is take my name in vain. The nations mock me, almost implyingly rightly so, because you've taken my name and you do A, B, C, D, E, and F, and it's disgraceful. Same thing in the New Testament. You have the same idea of really, it was said recently, I shared the quote, a Christian, by the way, said this. He said, the more devout you are, let's say you believe something that's wrong about God, and we all do, because we're not infallible and we're not inerrant. We all probably hold some things to different degrees that aren't true of God, right? We all have some soft blasphemy in some drawer of our mind. And this Christian said, the more devout you are in holding on to something that's wrong about God, the more ruin you do to yourself and to God, because you're not bringing him glory. And then he follows that up with this: you'd be better off as an atheist than you would be a devout follower of a false God, or a falsification about God's character. And there's some truth to this. So anyway, what I'm saying to you is, have that childlike curiosity this season. Start fresh. Shake your Etch-a-Sketch. Open the Gospels and see what you find there. Now, look, I know I've got atheist friends and even Christian friends who could point to some things in the Gospels that they would take issue with about Jesus himself. Yeah, we'll have that conversation. Fine. I don't mind having that conversation. But I think a lot of what people hold against, whether it be God or Jesus, is man-made. I know, and most of it isn't made by adversaries. George MacDonald once said that theologians have done more to mar the person, he said to mar the gospel, than all of its adversaries. That's true. That's absolutely true. It's very easy to walk away from Jesus or any of his teachings or the impact of his life because the Christians that surround you are all jerks. And they are so much so more than people outside the faith that something stinks in Denmark, right? They say, wow, if that's what following Christ looks like, then Christ must be that way, or Christ must inspire judgmentalism, hypocrisy, bigotry, pathological behavior, toxic attitudes towards others. By the way, this is a common belief, and this is one reason that I don't have a Jesus sticker on my car, because my driving doesn't, at times, not all the time, but my driving at times wouldn't bring glory to God, and I don't want to carry his name in vain even on the bumper of my car. Right? All right. I'm going to leave that with you today, and maybe follow up with you in a few weeks. But try this as an experiment. For the sake of argument, you can do this. I'm not saying throw it away forever. Maybe your statement of faith, your church statement of faith, or the reason you follow a particular denomination is very dear to you and you hold it as sacred. Fine. But for the sake of this exercise, set it aside. Put weight on the bat and swing it. It's an exercise to make you better when you step into the batter's box. Look at this as an exercise and as a test, as a challenge. I can tell you, you won't be disappointed. Contemplate Jesus, and not just the big, the incarnation, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. I'm not saying there's not a lot there to contemplate. I don't disagree with Rust Cole. You could spend a lifetime contemplating those things and still finding fruit. I have done so with the story of the prodigal son. I revisit it often in my mind, and I see new angles, and I glean new nuggets that I hadn't seen before. So certainly something as big as the incarnation. Now, I find with modern Christians that they downplay the incarnation. And, there are Protestants who would say the Catholics make too much of the crucifixion. Mel Gibson's movie focused too much on, the sorrow and the wretchedness and the pain of the crucifixion. And we Protestants, we have an empty cross. We don't hang a crucifix on our walls because we know the cross is empty and the tomb is empty. This argument is really foolish. To appreciate the full depth of the moment, yes, in all of its glory, I understand. But most Christians spend too much time on that, and they don't appreciate the incarnation. The idea of God becoming man, to me, is much greater than God being resurrected. I don't think that in a degree of difficulty even approaches the incarnation. Now, the reason it's so important to Christians is because they have skin in that game. They believe that their eternal destiny depends on Christ being resurrected, and so that's why they care so deeply about it, if truth be told. But the idea of the incarnation, and yes, I know there were other gods who came into mankind. Zeus became a bull to have sex with a hot human, a hot maiden. Okay, how does that look compared to Jesus? I'm willing to talk about the other gods who've done this, but if you want to compare the stories, sure. What kind of meaning do you get out of that? I think the incarnation is something that I'd ponder that gets a little short shrift in our time. But aside from that, what about the woman at the well? In all its beauty. That Christ noticed the forsaken and the outcast and the oppressed, and he wouldn't walk by indifferently. The Good Samaritan. All right, I'll leave you there. Have a great Sunday. Christmas is coming up. I hope you have a wonderful time with your family. We'll see you next week.